Hi, Cherron.
I'm saying you said 5 past.
Yes.
The numbers still coming in, so should we start?
Yes, please do go ahead. Let's start. We
All
have
right,
181, 83, 84 in. So please.
Okay. Okay.
I already have 95 chats, and do remind people to put their Q&A in the Q&A session. Thank you.
I will do. We're going to make a start. Hello and welcome everyone to this evening's webinar. It's called The Power of White Allies. My name is Shanley Inko-Tariah, and I will be chairing this evening's panel discussion. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of the Power of Staff Networks, but I'm also a non-executive director at Homerton University Hospitals. And this webinar is one of a series that started at the beginning of lockdown, and it was organized by the Nigerian Nurses Charitable Association. So for those of you who have attended this before, welcome back. If this is your first time, what you may not know is way back in April, Wendy and her team saw a need to provide a platform for voice. People were feeling afraid, they were feeling scared, they were feeling powerless, they were feeling, voiceless throughout the pandemic. So they organized this platform and brought in a variety of esteemed speakers to provide insight and advice, knowledge, support, and encouragement at a time when people were feeling very low indeed. So Wendy, just say congratulations to you and your team for, being visionaries and bringing this platform to help so many people. So it's a real honor for me to be chairing this evening. What you may not also know is this evening's topic came up as just a conversation between two women who wanted to do something progressive. And Edith Akinkide, who you can see on the screen here, said, oh, I think it'd be really good if we could get someone like John Brouder and Oliver Shanley in the room. And I said, yeah, why don't we call it the Power of White Allies? And then we got Samantha Allen involved, and here we are today. And that just goes to show the power of what can happen from little conversations that are thinking progressively. So here's how things are going to run this evening. I will be asking the panelists some questions just to get things started around white allies, around race, around COVID, around a number of other things. But that doesn't mean you won't get the opportunity to ask questions. We are encouraging everyone to pose their questions in that Q&A box. So somewhere on your screen, it's either on the bottom or at the side, there's a Q&A box. So please pose your questions there. You can use the chat to say hello and do a running commentary, but we'll only be looking at those questions in the Q&A box. I hope that's clear. I hope that makes sense. All right. In terms of housekeeping, just so we can hear everything that our panelists say, we don't want to miss anything. Can I please remind you to put your devices on mute? Okay. And the final thing I would say around housekeeping is that this event is being recorded. Now, before I introduce the panelists, I just want to ensure that everyone understands why this webinar is important. So, in my opinion, there are two viruses killing Black people. When I say Black, I'm using it in the political way, meaning Asian and ethnic minorities, okay? So there's two viruses killing Black people, and that's COVID-19 and racism. There are two viruses. The other thing I think is important to say here is all lives matter. Of course they do. However, the world has watched a Black man being murdered. The knee on the neck of George Floyd was a visual manifestation of the systemic racism that Black people face here in the UK. And for many of us, this oppression feels like a knee on our necks, slowly choking us. Whether it's the new crossfire, whether it's Stephen Lawrence murder, whether it's stop and search, the disproportionate number of Black men in the criminal justice system, whether we're more likely to be dismissed, less likely to be promoted, whether it's COVID-19. All of these things indicate that all lives do not matter. And that is why when we say Black Lives Matter, we're reminding the world that we do. So if you're tempted to say, in response to Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, please rethink that. And the final thing I will say is this. You may hear the phrase white privilege mentioned today. And if that phrase makes you cringe or feel uncomfortable, it could be that you simply do not understand what we mean. So let me be very clear. White privilege is not the assumption that everything someone who is white has accomplished is unearned, it's just been handed to them. Most white people have reached their level of success because they've worked hard. This is true. However, when we talk about white privilege, it means that you have this built-in advantage and it's separate from your income or your effort. It means that the system that you're in works for you rather than against you. Yes? And the final thing, this is the very final thing, and then I will move on to the panel, is this. In every civil rights movement in history, the charge will be led by those who feel it the most, and rightly so. However, we also need allies walking beside us and speaking out when we aren't in the room, when we aren't present. People in power do not give up power easily, and until many of us can get to those tables of influence where the decisions are being made that impact us, we need allies to play their part. And with that said, I am thrilled that we have 3 white allies here joining us this evening. I'm going to introduce them very quickly, and then I'm going to ask them to spend just 2 or 3 minutes just sharing a little bit of their story. So we have John Brouder, who is a specialist advisor on diversity and inclusion for NHS England and NHS Improvement with a focus on London. We have Professor Oliver Shanley, OBE, who is the CEO of the North East London Foundation Trust. And we also have Samantha Allen, who is the CEO of Sussex Partnership NHS Trust. Good evening, panelists, and welcome. John, let's start with you. Who are you and what is your story?
Wow, thank you, Cherron. That was a powerful way to kick this off. It was hugely impressive. Thank you for that. It's a privilege for me to be here. I'm really delighted and honoured to be asked. So thank you. I suppose I've been working in the NHS for all public services, whether it's in the provider arena as a regulator or a commissioner, for 42 years. So it's been a long time. And for me, this is something that has hardly changed in all of that time. And I hope Oliver will forgive me for saying that I was previously chief exec of North East London Foundation Trust, and I was there for more than 10 years. And during that period, NELFT, as we call it, was the only organisation in the country. When the workforce race equality standards were published, that was the only organisation that met all of those standards. And continue to improve year on year. Now, that wasn't because say, there's a serious problem in this specific area. It was because as an organization, we sought to develop a positive, inclusive culture that valued everyone. And that was a really powerful experience for me. I would always say, I made mistakes. We all make mistakes. It wasn't a fantastic, flawless period. We all make mistakes, but that's what we learn from. And I'm hugely passionate about this business of equality and diversity. And it was on the basis of that experience that Sir David Sloman asked me if I would come and work with him in London. And I currently have the privilege of working with Yvonne Coghill, and we're developing a strategy for London. But I suppose some of the things that concern me and that really do pain me is we think about all public services are directly accountable in our political system. And I remember last year, Berko, as a speaker in the House of Commons, talking about the bullying, the racism, the toxic culture. And that is a system that we are all accountable into, and we have to think about where the role models are. And I think, Simon Stevens has been fantastic. He's spoke about supporting everybody in the NHS and really raising the profile of diversity and inclusion. I think that's hugely important. But I then worry that we have a situation where the Prime Minister talks about a sense of discrimination, a sense of victimization. That almost implies, I don't believe this, it's not real. That is a worry. And I think that really underlines the importance of having active white leaders at the highest level in the NHS to change the way we work. And it has to be now. And I think, you know, we talk about power, we talk about majority, we talk about must recognize white privilege. Now is the time for white leaders to stand up. This is not a black problem. Racism is not a black problem. It's all of our responsibility. But the issue at the moment, if that majority do not stand up and own this and really grasp it and take it forward, nothing will change. But there is so much energy around right now. I am hugely optimistic.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Now is the time. Now is the time, Oliver. What say you? Who are you and what's the story?
Well, absolutely now is the time. And again, I'd just like to echo John's sentiments. It's just such an enormous privilege to be asked to be with you all tonight. So actually thrilled to be here and really look forward to the evening ahead. So thank you for that. Who am I? Good question. So I thought I'd perhaps go right back, if I may. So I come from a really large Irish family. I'm a white male, as you can see, and carry all the advantages of that. But grounded in my DNA is something that my mum and dad taught me right from a very, very early age. And they told me that when they first moved to England from Ireland in the 1950s, they had awful trouble finding accommodation in London, because everywhere they went would have no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. And they built in me from a very early age a sense of social injustice and the need to just call it out where you see it. And I feel that never really left me. I think that's part of my DNA for all things that drive me around wanting to call out injustice, discrimination, and just try and face it down when we can. And I suppose, so my background is I did a variety of stuff, ultimately ended up becoming a mental health nurse. Lots of my family are nurses, and I came into mental health nursing. And part of the reason that attracted me to mental health nursing was because I also saw, in a very personal way, how people who experienced mental ill health were marginalised, discriminated, and often treated just woefully. And I felt perhaps there was something in that space that I could offer to try, in my own small way, tackle some of the discrimination I saw across mental health services. So I carry that with me, and then through the 30-odd years I've been in the NHS, have seen on numerous occasions, discrimination, bullying, racism. And one of the things that I feel is important that I can do is I use the office that I'm now in, is to try and call it out where I see it and do what I can to affect a better outcome. So I suppose it feels a very personal thing. I think it's really, really important to me that I do all I can to challenge discrimination, challenge racism, and use every opportunity to improve things where I can.
Thank you, Oliver. Really like that. Call it out when I see it, challenge it when I see it. And that's the hard thing sometimes. It really is difficult to do that. And it does take people who understand their privilege and their power to do that regularly. Samantha, over to you. Who are you? And share us a little bit about your story.
Thanks, Cherron. So hi everybody, I'm Sam Allen. A real privilege to be here this evening, and I'm really nervous actually. Not nervous because, you know, I know that this won't be a great conversation, I'm going to learn lots, but just because I suppose this is a topic that really deeply matters to me. What I would say is that I don't think it always was a topic that mattered deeply to me, or even one that I really understood. And it's really probably been over the last sort of 2 to 4 years, really, that, you know, talking to colleagues, doing some research, listening, learning, and I think also through my work as chair of the Women Leaders Network, that I've come to get a better understanding, I think, of everything that, you know, you've touched on, Cherron, John has, and Oliver has, really, about the level of discrimination, the systemic nature of that, I think, around structures and processes, and what that does to people, what that does to people's lives. So, you know, I suppose I'm a chief executive. I'm a chief executive of the NHS. I feel like I'm a bit of an accidental chief executive. If I told you that in 1996 I fell into working in the NHS, it wasn't planned, it just happened. I needed a job, I had bills to pay, and I was a receptionist. And I suppose I've sort of clawed my way up, around, sideways, any which way really, across the health service to progress and develop. And a lot of that has been self-development, because, you know, I realised from the outset that nobody was going to help me. I wasn't part of a special scheme, or, you know, I didn't have anybody really advocating for me. So for me, I think now I've got this position, and I think, as I said, with my work around the women's agenda and the marginalisation, you know, that occurs around gender equality, disability, sexuality, you know, but most deeply race. You know, I'm on a journey of learning, and I think when you're a chief executive, you have power, you have privilege, you have the opportunity to make a difference. And I suppose I've come to learn, in terms of my leadership, it's in service to my community, it's in service to my colleagues. You know, my job is to help them do their jobs, and therefore it's really important to learn about what matters to them, to learn about what we need to redesign to change the structures, the processes. And I suppose 2 years ago, it all changed for me. And that was when our equality and diversity lead, Cassandra, gave me the book, Why I'm Not Talking to White People About Race Anymore. And I sat and I read that over a number of weeks. And I just had so many light bulb moments. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to hear more. And I think, like you, because I have been lurking on some of these calls on a Friday evening, I've heard the anger, the pain, the devastation that COVID has reaped right across our communities, but more importantly, you know, the inequalities that it has exposed. And these weren't there in February and March. These have been there for years, hundreds of years. So, you know, I think that we need to have flattened hierarchies. I think we need to distribute our power. I think that we need a health service that is designed for our communities and for their benefit, and you know, nobody else's benefit. And I suppose, therefore, I'm willing to push myself into positions of discomfort to do that learning, really, and to learn. So I suppose, you know, I'm really, really great. It's such a privilege to be here tonight. I'm delighted to share my views, but, you know, I'm learning as well.
Samantha, thank you so much for being so candid and sharing about the fact that you're on a journey and you're learning. And I think many will appreciate that. But I love what you said around using your power, your privilege, and indeed your position to get things changed. And these are the very things that many Black people felt that they didn't have, especially when we were in the heart of the crisis. They felt that they didn't have the power. They certainly didn't have the privilege, and their positions meant that they didn't have a voice either. So that leads me on to asking you, what are you doing to ensure that staff have a voice? Because people do want to speak up, but there's this fear that if they do speak up, it's going to go against them, it's going to have a mark against their name, it's going to deny them opportunities in the future. So it's not easy. It's not easy. You know, some people have to choose which battles they're going to fight because they have a mortgage to pay, and, you know, they've got things, you know, bills to pay. So what are you doing in your realms to help ensure that people feel safe to speak up? And you know, how are you going to use your positions of power to help others speak up? And sure. Let's start with, do you want to start, Samantha?
I'm just going to have to tell, I'm in the work still, and I think they're going to set the alarm, so I just need to ask them to leave it. Bear with me, if someone else could start.
Okay, I'll start with you then, John. Over to you, John. You kick us off with that one.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, I love that comment there. Services should be designed for the people that we serve. I think that is profoundly important in terms of how we change things. One of the things that I would say is we have to shift culture, and that's not an overnight job. That takes a long time. And I spend an enormous amount of my time as a chief executive listening to people and trying to understand what their lived experience was, and then beginning to build back systems with them involved in that. We have to, but you have to gain trust in any system and organization. So you have to work at this and you have to persevere with it, and you have to demonstrate that you're doing what you said you would do and getting feedback and shifting, and it has to be a constant cycle of change, if you like, that people are involved in. And a lot of my time at the moment is spent with talking to lots of individuals from different organizations and supporting them to generate the sort of change that leads to cultural change, but also suggesting to every single white person that I come across that has a position of authority that it is their responsibility to stand up, to step forward and take this on. I was amazed last week. So Prerna Issa is the chief people officer for the NHS, and she was tweeting last week or the week before, almost begging white leaders to stand up and own this, you know, and her quite rightly saying, I cannot do this on my own. I don't have that sort of power. I am not majority but have to stand up. And I thought it was hugely brave of her to do that in such a public way. She must be admired for that. But I think what we need to feed back into that is the effort that we spend an enormous amount of time now really chasing down white leaders and encouraging them and supporting them to take this initiative forward. I think, I always think when we see something and we know it's something that we should do and we know it's right, for only two reasons. It's one of two reasons. A statement of competence, they don't feel okay, they don't feel equipped, they don't feel knowledgeable. So that has to be a situation in which we support them with education and development. The second reason why people don't do things, maybe it's because they know it and they actually don't want to do it. And there have to be some very serious considerations about people that are in post that know this and are not doing anything about it. And it's not because it's an educational deficit.
Thank you, John. It's interesting when you use the word we have to chase down allies. You know, we almost are begging them to stand up for something that's fundamentally right. And what I do often feel is there isn't any consequence for failing to do that, for failing to stand up for racism and calling it out. There's no consequence. And as a result, people just choose not to do anything. And the whole purpose of an ally is to speak up, because I won't always be there, and I shouldn't have to be there in order for someone to say what you just said, whoever, is actually wrong, and I'm going to challenge you on that, and how does that fit into our values? Oliver, how do you make sure that that type of thing happens where you are? How do you ensure that colleagues who may be reluctant or just don't understand it, how do you make sure that they get it?
So I think you have to continuously work at it. I don't think there's any silver bullet, and I think you have to be committed to calling out every time you see it. I, as you said at the beginning, I'm in this enormous privileged position where I took over as chief exec from John, and one of the reasons it's such a joyous role is I've got this amazing staff network, EMN network, who are just simply superb. and keep me grounded and tell me when I'm going off beam, and you know, just immense. And we've been having this series of webinars since COVID about how we try and make sense of what's going on and what I can do to try and support. And one of the things that struck me in the last one, we were talking about how we make sense of what's happening, and particularly in relation to the Black Lives Matter. Some of the feedback from colleagues was around, well, why is the onus to change always on BAME communities? What white folks doing about it? And that's for me was another really powerful message about, well, we've just got to step up more here and use our voices and use the authorities of the roles that we're in to change things. You know, I think what you said earlier on about people being frightened to have a voice because of the consequences, it goes back to culture. And we have to fix cultures where people don't feel safe or feel that they're going to be somehow intimidated or influenced have an adverse effect on their career. So I think it's enormously important we do that. Part of the reason I feel that, so when I was, so I told you earlier on I was a nurse, and when I was a staff nurse, I was working in a medium secure unit, and I was asked if I'd go out and give a injection to one of our clients who was in the community. So I went out to see the client with a nursing assistant and gave the injection. And when I got back to the ward, I realised I'd misplaced the syringe. So I said to the ward manager, I don't know what's happened to the syringe, I've lost it. I thought it was the right thing to do, went back, retrieved it. And then shortly after that, I got disciplined for saying what I thought was the right thing to do, to saying, look, this is, you know, that I'd lost the syringe, I don't treat it. No harm was happened. But I was disciplined. I think I was given something like, I don't know, a year or 18-month written warning. And I remember this huge sense of shame and injustice and anger that me saying what I think was the right thing to do had an adverse effect on me and how I felt. And I've carried that forever, I think, in that how can I be in an organisation, or how can I lead an organisation now where some of the colleagues that I work along might feel like that. It feels very personal to me that trying to change culture where people feel safe and empowered and are free from bullying, harassment is, you know, we've got to fix that. And I haven't yet, and I don't know if I'll ever do it if I'm here for another 20 years, but I will continue to work on it and do my best, because we just got to do it. It's just not right. And I think you have to use positions as chief exec, etc., to say that, because if we don't say it, people are, you know, you just perpetuate and colluding with the same old stuff, and that's got to change.
Thank you, Oliver. I appreciate you saying that. It does have to change, and I think, well, me certainly, you know, like, enough is enough. We can't take this anymore. So Samantha, let me come on to you to ask you, you know, when we talk about allies, you know, ally is not a label that we give ourselves or you give yourself. It's not a noun. It's something that you do. It's action orientated. It's verb. So when you say, you know, I'm an ally, what does that look and feel like to you? And I want you to, you know, speak to those who are maybe misunderstanding what their role is as a white ally.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I get the term ally because, again, in the women's agenda, we talk about men as allies, and it's really important to engage the men, because we don't engage the men, we're not going to make progress. I think allyship, to me, it isn't saviourship. So it's not about preaching to people. It's not about imparting your opinion upon.
Hallelujah, preach. Thank you.
You've got to be self-aware, okay? You've got to do your research, you've got to learn. It's about using your privilege, you know, it's about amplifying the voices of others when they're in the room, when they're not in the room. It's about connecting with friends and colleagues and asking them how they are, how their families are. You know, what are they going through at the moment? Trying to walk a mile in their shoes. I kind of, but I tell you what, a really great colleague of mine, Tracy Jolliffe, about 18 months ago, I went to one of her workshops. And for a long time, I've been a massive LGBTQ plus ally. You know, I'd go to Pride, I do all sorts of things. And after a while, I realised I was doing it for me, because actually it was great fun, you'd see people, but I never stopped and actually asked that community, what do you need from me? What does a good ally for you look like right now? And I suppose that's where, you know, that was again another light bulb moment for me. So, you know, I think allyship is about being in service to others. It's not about being in service to yourself. And, you know, just going back to the point about why is it that we haven't made progress? Because actually, I think for some people in power, speaking up about this isn't going to win them friends and influence. It's not going to get them the next gong. You know, this is tough stuff, and it's a tough place to be. So actually, you've got to be motivated by other people's interests and not yours to do this work.
Tough stuff. Okay. Yeah, that's a new way of looking at things. You know, thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's just yeah, you're right. We've got lots of questions in, and I just want to get to you. You know, we're going to get to your questions in a minute, because I really want to give them the attention that they deserve. And so, Felicia, if I can ask you or Wendy to start getting ready to ask some of those questions, we'll be coming your way in a minute. Let me ask you this, and you know, whoever wants to put their hand up to answer this first. Before COVID-19, before we saw the death of George Floyd, before we heard about, you know, the protests around the world and in the UK, how often did you talk about you know, the Black and Asian workforce at your board meetings, or, you know, on a regular basis in your groups? How often did this come up in terms of not just going through the res, but how often did you say, you know what, I'm really concerned about this, we need to do something? John, is that your hand going up there? Yeah, over to you.
Yes, it was. Thank you. And I would say the answer to that is very regularly. Because years ago and now, because this was such a big issue, and the board was not, it didn't really be served. We had some very powerful networks. BAME network was one of them, and I had the board agree that the right thing to do would be to invite the chair of the BME network onto the board, and for that to be a continuous agreement till such time as we thought that the board was representative of the community. They've been working on this for years. In some ways, I think the good news is that COVID has exposed so much of the weakness in the system. And I think that accelerated, and I don't think we've ever been in a time when I think we can afford to be quite optimistic.
Thank you, John. What about you, Oliver? I mean, perhaps I'm asking the wrong people because you're here and you're kind of sharing your story, but how often did it come up in a conversation with your peers, shall we say? If it's rarely,
so less fine. Less okay. So. Mm-hmm. So I think I think there's a cohort who you would talk about this with, okay? But I you know, the res, as you say, res has been around. Res has been really, really important in sort of driving a different type of conversation across organisations, and rightly so. And I think that's taken us to a better place, far better place. But I think the COVID and then Black Lives Matter has just taken it to a far, far different level. The depth of anguish and anger and despair, and you know, in my trust, in NELFT, it's felt like a battle trying to go through COVID. we've had three colleagues die, 3 BME colleagues die, and that's just been, you know, just completely awful on so many levels. And as that's happening around us, you're getting the evidence coming out more and more and more. And then Black Lives Matter. And then this week, I think it was this week, the most recent Public Health England document about, you know, the real reality of what people are experiencing. And I don't feel like that level of conversation is readily happening enough as it should. So I think for me, this feels like a seminal moment. And if we don't use this seminal moment, if people like me don't use this seminal moment, then well, shame on us. We should hang our heads in shame. So I think this is hugely important, and that's partly why I wanted to be able to listen and understand what's happening tonight, because, you know, I thought I was pretty switched on to this and understood it and had some sense of it. But actually, the closer I get to it, I realise, well, I'm not that at all. I've just got so much to learn. And if I'm really going to be of any value or any use, I've got to learn and learn and learn and do more and more and more. So I think this is a different period we're in now, and we've got to do something about it.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you. Samantha, did you want to add to that?
I mean, I suppose just to say that I think Black Lives Matter has certainly come into the fore, obviously, over the last few weeks, but it's been around for quite a long time. But why is it that it wasn't as front and centre as it has been? And, you know, obviously the horrendous murder of George Floyd, I mean, it's deeply distressing. And I think, you know, it's a global issue. But I mean, I've been quite fortunate. I've been in spaces with, you know, I've got a learning set that I'm a member of. I think race and equality and inclusion comes up as a pretty common thread throughout all of that. And then have also been able to build some relationships with colleagues like Navina and Rob Webster, where we've been able to come together more recently to use our positions to kind of speak out about this, particularly around, you know, diverse representation. But the reality is, if you're talking about a group of chief executives, you're lucky to get a BAME colleague in the room because there are so few there. So and what I do find is actually when you have a colleague, a BAME colleague around the table, it is more likely to come up. But of course, you know, the onus is always on them. And that's another conversation I have with people. Why should they do all the heavy lifting on this? And, you know, be the one that's always bringing it up. I mean, I think for chief executives, and, you know, it's good to see what's happening in London. I think the chief execs there, and John, I think you've been involved in that as well, are doing some work with learning sets. I think this is it's an educational programme that we all need to go through, actually. And, you know, the other thing I would say is it needs to matter. And, you know, why is it that we have good and outstanding organisations on the CQC that are actually failing or not doing well in other places? Because so actually if the system really values this and really wants to put its where its mouth is and says this truly matters, then ensure that there are consequences for not getting it right. I haven't got it all right in our organisation. We've got a hell of a lot of work to do, but really make sure it matters, because then it'll keep it on the agenda. Trust me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Samantha. Important to keep it on the agenda. That's my fear, that when all of this is settled in however that looks like, then it just be something else will just take over and creep up to the top of the agenda, and this, you know, goes back down. I'm going to call on Dr. Banjoka, who just wanted to briefly share about her experience with a white ally. Dr. Titi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cherron, and you're doing a fantastic job. I just wanted to share my own personal experience with the White Ally. So the boss, who Sam knows, in Sussex ICS, Adam Doyle, has I would describe as my personal White Ally. He, first of all, this is just being honest, there was an incident in my organization where somebody used the N-word, and nobody called it out for a long time. There were no immediate consequences. He didn't know about it. The moment he knew about it, He called me, called another exec lead, and asked for the person to be fired immediately on the spot. Now, that to me was actually demonstrating leadership, visible. You know, there wasn't even up for discussion. It was just get rid of. If we need to pay, we will pay. And that's one incident. Another incident is he encourages me to apply for roles and supports me in my development. So not, you know, and I am the executive managing director of Brighton and Hove CCG, and I can confidently say that is his support as my supporter who sees something in me, because many of us as BAME people, we've been beaten down so many times that the confidence, the self-assurance of who you are, you know, is not there. And even where he supports me down to the point where he'll say, maybe, you know, you need to do this, practice this, do this, practical tips. And through this period of COVID, where I've, you know, sort of been very angry about a number of things, even with the George Floyd, I said I was very angry. And he said, what's wrong with being angry? You should be angry. You should be angry. It is what you do with your anger, you know. And for me, I think we need more people like that, and as well as the panelists here. So I describe him as somebody who walks alongside me, not in front of me, but actually alongside me, and brings out the best and calls it out when he sees it. And as people said here, without any fear of recrimination, you know, doing the right thing. And that to me is what we want to see a lot more. So people know that they wouldn't use that language if he's around, because they can see the consequences. Things have to have consequences and immediate consequences. So I just wanted to put that there are lots of people who are like that. And what we need is a lot more of these people being more visible, you know, so that people begin to see, because, you know, the lack of visibility is why people think they can get away with it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. T, for sharing that story. It is important to hear what happens when, or what white allyship looks like in action. So thank you for sharing that. And unfortunately, we need more Adam Doyles because there aren't sufficient of them around. We have Samantha, Oliver, and John here, but we need far, far more. So look, I did promise that we move to the questions. I could see 99 questions in the box, and I really do not want to deny our fantastic audience the opportunity of hearing their questions aired and answered. So is it Felicia that's going to be leading us on these questions? Okay, Felicia, welcome to the panel. Over to you to help us go through the questions.
Okay, so welcome everybody. There are so many questions. So I think myself and Priscilla will be moderating. So let's start with the first one, and that's to all the panel. How do we best support staff affected by discrimination who speak passionately about racism, but you often see their understandable anger in response to inaction over the years? So how do you coach staff to be able to manage those scenarios? And that's for the panel.
Who wants to tackle that one?
I can sort of, shall I start, Cherron? So, I mean, I think listening is really important. So giving people space and time and opportunities to be heard when they're ready, making sure that they can also access support, and also making sure that they've got access to coaching as well, if that's available for them. Those would be things that I would do personally. I think also connecting them with their network and their peers, also other people with lived experience, to share what they're going through and learn what worked for them.
Unless John or Oliver have anything else to add, do you have something else to add? We can just move on to the next question, or is that...
Okay.
I think Samantha is absolutely right. The culture of the organisation has to be explicit. We have to be very open about the need to create that psychological safety. We have to have structures that people know that they can go to. We have to have structures outside line management. We have to encourage people to use things like the network, the Speak Up Guardian, their unions. And I, as a chief exec, always did that and always tried to bring those agencies into induction so that the messages were very clear on day one. But as Samantha says, we have to give people space, take it seriously and learn from it.
Oliver, you're nodding in agreement with that. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think that's right. I think people you have to feel able to have a voice and be listened to and respected. And we know that's not universally the case all the time. And that goes back to both John and Sam's point around culture. And that's where, the culture of organisation, the tone of the organisation is set by the leadership. And, if they don't get about mutual respect, kindness, civility, compassion, then, it doesn't bode well for that flowing through the rest of the organisation.
Thank you. Felicia?
Okay, a further question. Most board members in NHS organisations or other organisations are mainly white British. How do you encourage diversity and inclusion in these boards? Do people require certain qualifications to be on the boards? Approach.
Good question.
And
So, I think you've got to seek it out. So actually the board of the organisation I work in is very diverse. It's incredibly diverse in terms of race, in terms of gender, and in terms of sexual orientation. And we've done that in a number of ways, obviously kind of through when opportunities open up, but I think particularly with our non-executive directors, we've created what we call associate non-executive director roles. So they're almost like shadow non-executive directors, and particularly targeting and opening that up to people who maybe wouldn't normally get a substantive non-executive director role, so they can gain experience there. So drawing people from a number of sectors, but you've got to kind of really be proactive and going out there. And I think also how you market yourself. People will not want to come and join a board that isn't, hasn't got the right values and isn't, signed up to the right vision. So I think it's a case of being proactive, and also the talent pipeline. So it's certainly in our executive team, we've now got good succession plans in place. We're looking at 2-3 down in the organisation. Our organisation, we've got 13% of our workforce are BAME, but only 5% of that of our BAME colleagues are in 8A and above roles. So if they're not there and they're not coming through, we're not going to be able to support people to then progress onto board positions. So you've got to get sort of 6, 7, 8 years ahead really with the pipeline and the development.
Thank you, Samantha. Oliver, did you want to come? Oh, John, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, John, go on, you go first.
Please carry on, Oliver.
Oh, you're so polite. Oliver, go for it.
So I think the pipeline piece is really, really important, but it's complicated. So I've worked with, coach, mentored, for want of better words, a number of BME colleagues over the years, and there is such a fight to get through the ranks and grades of the NHS hierarchy, and people get a bit worn out and lack confidence at times, and there's the system has to become much less rigid and really understand the biases that are baked into the system. The amount of colleagues who have just been absolutely amazing potential leaders, but come and have sat with me and said, Oliver, I don't think I can do this. Or they go for a job and they don't get it, and they come back and say, well, I clearly wasn't good enough. And it's rubbish. It's not. It's about, we've got to work really hard about giving people faith and confidence and challenging some of the systems that perpetuate people having difficulty climbing through into leadership roles. So I think, again, it goes back to, you know, part of a chief exec role is to make sure how we try and allow that pipeline to develop in our organisations. And I say that, recognise that in my own organisation, we haven't got that right yet. So my executive team is an all-white executive team. And we've got to do something about that, because it doesn't mirror my staff group, certainly doesn't mirror the communities we serve. So we have to understand how we enable opportunities for all colleagues to get through the, you know, to maximise their potential. We haven't got that right yet.
Okay.
It's probably also worth adding that directors have open-ended appointments, whereas non-executive directors tend to have fixed terms, so they're 3 years and then they're renewed. And the opportunity that organisations do have to shift the balance in the board is to target BAME non-executive directors, because that supports and encourages a more diverse discussion and will influence the direction of the organisation going forward. So I think that's something that's really valuable, certainly something I've done historically, and it has made a difference.
Thanks, John. And can I just say, before I hand back over to Phoenicia, that you know, as a non-executive director and a black female, it is challenging at times, and that's why the CECOL group, which is a network for you know, black and Asian minority ethnic NEDs in the NHS, is so important. You know, not only do we provide support for each other and encourage one another, but we're also working with NHS England and NHS Improvement to actually build more of the pipeline and get more representation and effectiveness on our boards, because it's necessary. And COVID-19 definitely proved how vital it is to have a diversity of voices influencing some of the decisions that are being made at that top table. So great question. Let's move on to the next one. Thanks, Phoenicia.
The next topic is around risk assessments. So want to really ask the panel, have you tracked the percentage of risk assessments across your organisations? Has there been a priority for BAME staff? And an additional question with regards to the risk assessments, do staff within your organisations have a choice on who performs the risk assessment?
I can, yeah, certainly start there. So yes, we are tracking the risk assessment. It's really important, from, you know, certainly for me as the accountable officer, you know, the corporate onus is on us as the organisation. The risks and the issues have been well set out, and therefore it's really important that we make sure that every single one of our BAME colleagues has a risk assessment, or is it offered a risk assessment, and that's our substantive, our bank and our agency staff coming to work in the organisation as well. They're not all complete yet, they're underway. We developed a process with our BAME network, we undertook listening events with our BAME colleagues, and we've also done some training with the support of our BAME network for our managers as well. I'm really curious to look at, we're going to analyse them all when they're in, to look at any themes, any best practice that we can spot, because, you know, probably like Oliver's organisation, you know, we're very disparate organisations spread across 2 counties. So, you know, pulling it together and looking at to get some consistency of standards, I think will be a challenge. But I hope at my board meetings next month to be able to say that they are all complete. But like I said, they're still underway.
Oliver, would you like to answer that question as well?
Similar to Sam, actually. I guess the only bit I'd add is that we, in terms of developing the risk assessment, I think we ended up on something like version 6 or 7, and we went through a number of iterations. And I think the most powerful moment when we shifted into a more robust document was when the chair of our EMN network got heavily involved, and really through her leadership really shifted the dial about what the assessment should look like. And I was on a site visit a couple of weeks ago, and was chatting to colleagues there, and two of my BAME colleagues asking about the risk assessment, and for those two colleagues, what they said to me is it made them feel like the organisation valued them, and it made them feel safer. Now, I don't know whether that will be the case for all colleagues for sure, but I think it was worthwhile spending more time getting a risk assessment that was of value and meaning than having. I've seen some suggestion that there's others are more of a, you know, some commentators might say a tick box exercise, which is not really what it's about. It's trying to, you know, ensure we do all we can to keep colleagues safe. So we're still in progress, still got a long way to go, but it's so important we get it right. And I think it's important that the conversation is meaningful and is valued. And again, that's one thing we'll need to test. Has it always felt like that for colleagues who had the assessment?
Thank you. The next question really is around accountability. And we've talked about accountability through the webinar, but this comes as a question. Do you think an element of accountability is required for senior leaders to ensure equality and diversity is mandatory and effective?
I will respond to that because I've had lots of conversations about it just this week. And the answer is absolutely yes. Yeah, it's a challenge and how you build it in. And I would say that, you know, if you ask a chief executive where they are in terms of contract penalties or performance on waiting lists, they know the answers. If you ask about the financial position, they know the answers. I wonder how many can talk to the real lived experience of the people in their organisation and what it would look like if they had to be accountable for that. And I've had lots of discussions. I mean, there are things that are not in our gift, but earlier, how can you possibly have an outstanding rating from the CQC if the AME staff in your organisations have such an appalling experience? I don't know what the answer is. But we absolutely have to think about accountability going forward, and we absolutely have to think about how we should be rewarding and investing in organisations that do this well.
So, Felicia, can you just repeat? Sorry, Sam. Could you just repeat the question again? I just want to make sure you spoke about accountability and.
Do you think an element of accountability is required for senior leaders to ensure equality and diversity is mandatory and that it is effective?
That's what I thought I heard, because it's law. It is mandatory. It's legal. It's under the Equality Act. You know, fostering good relations between those with the protected characteristics and those that don't, as well as, you know, fostering good practices it's a public sector equality duty that I think sometimes we've completely forgotten about. So yeah, I just said it is mandatory, it's legal, and it's under the Equality Act 2010. So sorry, Sam, if I was gonna.
I was gonna say exactly the same thing, and I think, you know, that we've got the 2010 Act. It's a legal duty. Yeah, I know as a chief executive, you know, you're more likely to get a phone call if you're going way off on the money, or, you know, if you've got a significant quality concern. Quite rightly, in one of your services, nobody's going to ring you if you've got an all-white board. And yet I know from some research I did at the back end of last year, there were 70 NHS trusts in England with all-white boards. Why, you know, how can they possibly represent the views of their communities, you know? So I think that it's a much broader question actually that needs to be asked. What do we mean by accountability? You know, how are you going to measure that, and what will it mean back to the individual? Because unless there is accountability and personal responsibility, not something which is more corporate, more global, then I think it's going to be more challenging to get traction. And, you know, to reiterate the point I made earlier and the point John's just made, you know, CQC ratings is another really good example of that.
Thank you, Samantha. I'll proceed on to our next set of questions. Have any of the white allies on this panel ever had to call out racism in their career? If not, why not? If yes, how did you address it and what was the impact?
Yes, I have. And it'd be difficult to go into the individual circumstances because it was somebody I was mentoring at the time who, and it's always a challenge, isn't it, as a mentor, because you make part of your role not to get involved. You know, you're supporting the individual really, but they needed a bit more support because they had been on the receiving end of some, you know, quite insidious racism really, which I think for the individual who did that, actually had no idea what they had done. And I think that was why it needed calling out more than ever, because, you know, it was so casually done that clearly this individual probably wasn't the only person that had been on the receiving end of that. So that was tackled through supporting the individual to have a courageous conversation, but also reaching out to somebody who I know would be able to support them within that organisation system and be able to take action.
Oliver and John?
Yeah, I mean, there have been lots of occasions, and it is interesting, sometimes very overt, but you know, most often, as Sam says, it's what people call banter, and what they think is okay, and no sense of the wearing impact that it has on individuals. So, and there was an occasion where there was a grievance put forward, and we dealt with the grievance, but the work that happened after that was going back and working with that team, and it was similar to the position that Sam just outlined. The people in that team never thought of what they were doing as racist behaviour that had a well on ME colleagues. And I think it opened up the opportunity to have very frank, pretty unprecedented conversations in that team and improve things through that kind of route. But it was also made fairly explicit and public and common knowledge, because I think every time there's an event like that in an organisation and someone is brave enough to stand out and pursue a grievance, we have to play that out, not the detail of it or who was involved, but it has to be played back in division. So it's absolutely clear that A, that won't be tolerated, and when someone is brave enough to stand up, the organisation will support them, and to support them in a way that the rest of the organisation can see. And it reinforces a leadership position on this whole issue of racism and discrimination.
Oliver?
Yeah, well, I've seen it in these sort of insidious ways that John and Sam describe, and I've also seen it in overt ways where I've seen a letter. I think I won't say too much, but a letter that was overtly racist given to a member of staff, not in an organisation I'm in now, but previously, which was just vile. So led to a piece of work around understanding where that came from, and you know, it was just something that I would have thought you would struggle to see. I would have thought people would be so open about their blatant racism towards a particular member of staff. It was just truly awful, and but it's, you know, it's evidence again that it exists. So it's again why we need to do something about it, because you can't just because you don't see it, that doesn't mean it's not there.
Thank you. Leading on from that, there's a specific question for Oliver, and I want to tie it into equality and diversity training, because there are a number of us that have the view that the current model for equality and diversity training is not really fit for purpose, because it doesn't always talk about culture. So a specific question for you, Oliver, is how can cultural intelligence be integrated into the system so that organisations are held to account regarding transforming organisational behaviour and culture?
So I think John's point earlier was a good point. So sometimes what makes not always, but sometimes what makes organisations sit up is what you tend to get measured at. So I think Sam said, you know, around if the money goes off, you'll get a knock on the door. If the quality goes off, you get a knock on the door. But if not attending to discrimination and prejudice, well, that'll probably just carry on as you are. So I think there's something about ensuring that organisation and boards take it seriously. I think the broader cultural question, I think, is an important one. So one of the things that I think is important is around the whole notion of compassionate leadership, and compassionate leadership is built upon culture of allowing everyone a voice, everyone an opportunity to say how they feel, to have an opportunity to develop in their career. And I think you don't see that in so many organisations. One of the things that we're starting to develop, again, largely thanks to my BME network, is the Just Culture work that comes from Merseycare. And they've done some amazing work in transforming organisational cultures and eradicating bullying and harassment, driving up a greater understanding of cultural intelligence. So I think it's incredibly important, again, that we as chief executives look to develop that space across our organisations.
Thank you, Oliver. A question for all of the panel members. It's a comment, but leading into a question. So I am surprised that no statement has come from many NHS CEOs about this historical revolution that's taking place. So following on from that, are the issues around Black Lives Matters and the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on BME communities and staff, are you discussing that in your board meetings? And have you made statements to the workforce around those relevant issues that have been emerging?
Yes, the answer is yes. So in our board meeting in May, we focused very much around the impact of COVID-19 on BAME communities and our staff and workforce, and our board issued a board statement on the 22nd of May, setting out our commitment and also the specific actions that we took, which included doing an equality and human rights assessment on our incident command structure, making sure that we had diverse views and representations, committing to do the BAME risk assessments. I last week wrote to every member of staff in my organisation to share my anger and shock about the death of George Floyd, to share that I do think that our institutions are racist, that we also have that in our organisation, and that we've got some systemic issues to address in terms of structures and processes. But most importantly, wanted to kind of reinforce the point, and you know, I used a quote of Nelson Mandela in that, which is, it's one thing, it's one of the most difficult things to change, not to change a society, but actually to change oneself. So encouraging everybody in the organisation to have conversations and shed some resources around allyship and what that looks like. But also, we had done a webinar earlier that week where our chair of our BAME network had spoken, and one of our clinical psychologists had spoken about the impact on the BAME community, the importance of psychological safety, finding your voice and speaking up, but also recognising that it's a difficult time for everybody. And you know, the last thing, well, certainly what BAME friends and colleagues have told me is that they don't necessarily want white people kind of sharing all their guilt on, you know, through kind of seeing some moment of you know, the darkness that we've, you know, people have gone through over the last few months, but actually this is hundreds of years of history. So we've really just been trying to acknowledge it, because I do feel that the first step is acknowledging it in order to enable some healing. But also, you know, one of the things I'm really passionate about is that we have to signal an end to the virtual signalling around this, that we can't have plaudits and statements, that we've actually got to have action. So this will be a main agenda item at our July board, and we've looked to redouble our efforts around the actions that we're taking around health inequalities, around the COVID-19 disparities, and actually some of the systemic barriers that we've got in the organisation, whether it's HR processes, talent management, access to training, that now is the time actually to really, really commit to some deep, meaningful action and change around this.
Thank you. Oliver?
Yeah, we did statements myself and the chair of the staff network, BME staff network, did a statement together again within the organisation and on social media about the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. The chair of the network came to the board to essentially to go through the COVID-19 action plan, and it was a really invaluable piece of work actually, because it's when you go in this sort of mad time around COVID-19, you go into this command and control piece. So we all do our gold, silver, bronze, and you get into the rhythm of that. And what the network really powerfully did was hold a bit of a mirror up to the organisation and say, look, don't forget when you're doing this, you've got to think about this, 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 and this. And again, it's a tribute to my colleagues, because they ensure that they can come and knock on my door, phone me and say, look, Oliver, you haven't quite got this right, you need to recalibrate your lens. So it's really, really important. And from that, we now we've got a meeting every week, so I can hear directly what's going well or what's gone off stream, and how do we fix it. And then I can immediately try and recalibrate the organisation where we need to.
Thank you. I've got a particular challenging question to the panel. Why do our white allies or white colleagues find it so difficult to talk and discuss around race? Might I start with John on this question?
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I lost the connection for a while. No one noticed, I'm sure. So why do they find it difficult? It's interesting. I could tell you about an experience where I stood in front of a room a few months ago now, and there were maybe 150 people in the room, and a lot of white leaders, male, in the room, and talk about white privilege. And it is very disconcerting for people. I think there's a level of embarrassment, and I think that makes it kind of difficult. And I see people kind of looking at the ground and looking away, and they're clearly discomforted by this. I think there's a really strong sense of people don't know how to talk about this. And I'm pleased to say at the moment that we're doing a lot of work with the King's Fund and the leaders in London to encourage individuals to talk about this, to generate a sense of comfort about talking about this. So I don't know if it's about their discomfort because they don't feel well equipped. I don't know if it's because they just don't agree with it, but that they're not saying so. It's a really difficult question to ask, but certainly a lot of leaders have said to me, John, what is the one thing that I need to do to get my organisation up there? So there is maybe a sense of no one thing will ever achieve anything. It's 100 different sets of behaviours. So I think there's a will there to do. I think there is a discomfort, there's a lack of knowledge, and I think there's a major anxiety about it too, because people certainly feel exposed right now. And that's probably a good thing, but it's a very difficult question to answer.
Thank you, John. Samantha.
I mean, I'd agree with all of that. I think there's a bit of, I think there's fear. I think fear of getting it wrong, fear of giving up power, actually, and kind of sharing that power. But I think mostly fear. I think also, and I can only say this as a white woman, and this is only my experience, but I grew up, like Oliver, really principled parents, great opportunities, but almost conditioned not to talk about this. We didn't learn about it at school. We didn't learn about the history at school. We didn't see it. You know, if you've grown up in a very, you know, I lived abroad a lot and away from home a lot, and you know, very diverse friends, but I didn't live in diverse neighbourhoods at all. So, you know, I think there's a level of discomfort, and I think as leaders, and certainly my experience has been that showing your vulnerabilities and being open about your vulnerabilities, not knowing, being fearful, am I going to get this wrong? Am I being judged? Isn't something that's always encouraged, practiced or celebrated. So I've got no doubt that that's a part of it as well.
So I again, I agree with Sam and John. I think, so sometimes I feel, I don't know, is what I'm saying right? Is it, am I making myself look foolish? Am I saying the wrong thing? And I say to myself, Oliver, just be authentic, just be who you are, and hope that will guide you through, because people will see that you really want to understand their experience and do what I can to make it better. But I have often, even tonight in this conversation, these internal wranglings in my mind about, gosh, I don't know enough about this. What should I do more on that? How to become a more effective and better leader for all the people I serve? And you know, my mind goes into turmoil. But I feel I have to talk about it because it's incumbent upon me in the role I'm in to call it out. I think John's right. I think probably others might feel less inclined to talk about it because, you know, particularly, you know, the history of the NHS is you weren't necessarily supposed to be a leader who spoke about the feelings and stuff that scares you and stuff you don't understand, because that wasn't necessarily the model of leader that was espoused or valued. So it's something about being human and recognising that we don't have all the answers, all the solutions, but we want to try and do the right thing. And again, I rely heavily on others to say, give me a steer here, help me understand this.
Thank you, Oliver. So we are going to kind of continue with the issue around racism. So we know that there are different types of racism that people would ascribe to. So we know that there are constructs and systems within business, within politics, and to some extent, or some people might say to a large extent, within the healthcare sector. So the question from one of the callers is, in their opinion, institutional racism and institutional bullying are prevalent in NHS hospitals. Would the panelists have similar views to what he's just said? Does it exist? Doesn't it? What's your opinion on the issue of institutional racism within the NHS?
I'll kick off with that, Shanley, and say it's absolutely clear, and it has been for years. You know, all organisations run a staff survey every year, and the evidence is absolutely clear from all staff. You know, about 30%, I think, generally, is the average of people that experience bullying in the NHS. If you're from a BAME background, it's much more likely it will be you. The evidence is clear, and there has been no significant change in recent times. And what's really interesting, because we look at London, you know, I heard Sam talking earlier, I can't remember what figure she quoted about the BAME numbers in the organisation, but in some areas in London, it is 60%. And when you look at the res data and the staff surveys in London, London is significantly worse than the rest of the country. So yes, it absolutely exists, and the evidence is absolutely clear. And I think that is why, you know, people like Sir David Sloman are clearly standing up. Rena Essar, head of people for the NHS, clearly out there. Simon Stevens, absolutely clearly out there. We will not tolerate this continuing into the future.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose I've not a huge amount to add, but absolutely, I do believe that racism is institutional, and, you know, we only have, the evidence is all there. You know, our BAME communities have poorer health outcomes, as do our BAME colleagues. Why do they find it harder to progress into more senior roles? Why are they more likely to face a disciplinary? And why don't they feel safe speaking up, you know, when they've been harassed or abused? And even in my own organisation, you know, the highest number of incidents reported relate to verbal harassment. So the evidence is all there, and you know, it's an issue for the NHS, it's an issue for society, it's a global issue, and you know, the time has come to change that, because you know, this is a social justice and a human rights issue now. And you know, I think the impact of COVID, as the reports have told us, you know, has laid bare really the systemic impact of racism and the inequalities that exist right across society. And of course they are, they're at the heart of the NHS. We have to own up to that, speak up about that, and be honest about that.
Thank you. Can I? This is a question from myself. So we have seen the disproportionate impact on BME communities. We've also seen the significant numbers of deaths of BAME staff. So the first 10 doctors were BAME. When I looked at the last figures, 32 out of 34 doctors that had died were BAME, and the highest number of staff dying are also nurses and are BAME, as well as healthcare assistants, and it continues. So a question for you is that, since there's quite a lot of fear and worry and anxiety in the system, and I have heard on the ground that a number of, if we get a second wave, there will be increasing amounts of BME staff that will ask for increased shielding and will be very reluctant to work through a second wave. Can I ask you, what are your contingency plans for that? And have you commenced any workforce modelling should you lose 5, 10, 15, 20% of your BAME staff who will ask for increased shielding in the event of a second wave? If we start with, yes, Samantha, do you want to start?
Well, the honest answer is no, but I will be on Monday. The other thing I would say is I wouldn't be surprised, you know, if that is the case. And I just hope that actually one of the ways we can preempt that and reduce the risk of that is through meaningful risk assessments that, you know, really do provide those safe spaces where people can speak up and share this, and share with their organisations those fears and the concerns, particularly if there is a second wave. But can certainly completely understand colleagues feeling like that.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same. So haven't done that planning yet. I mean, I think I think we're only just sort of trying to get a groove back after the first wave. You know, it's been exhausting, and I said earlier on about deaths in NELFT, and that's just been incredibly powerful. Like been a shockwave gone right the way across the organisation, and we're trying to spend a lot of time thinking about emotional support for folk, trying to give people a greater sense of confidence in the organisation, confidence in PPE, you know, and the confidence in the risk assessment process. We're trying to build in layers to try and address, you know, colleagues' understandable fear and anxiety. So we are thinking about what future surges will look like, but I would just be completely misleading if I'd said I had a plan today, because I don't. Because, you know, up until a few weeks ago, we were honestly day by day just trying to get through the day, keeping folks safe, keeping the show on the road, making sure our patients were being cared for, and having to try and redeploy staff across the organisation. So it's been you know, challenging on a variety of levels. But in this period now where we're sort of starting to breathe a bit, I think that's what we have to do to think about the next steps, and the risk assessment process will be an integral part to that.
John, is there any, has the London region begun to to look at this or begun to think about what that might look like?
Sorry, I was muted. I can't answer that because I'm not in that sort of position. I know this has preoccupied everybody's minds, and there is a lot of thinking going on about the fear and the risk of a second wave, but I'm not really in a position to answer in any detailed way about workforce and contingency planning, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Okay, another question for the panelists, for all panelists. As a white NHS worker who isn't a department stroke team manager, how can I help push the anti-racist agenda in my trust? They say they call out racism when they see it, regardless of who's in the room, and they've actually joined their local BME network. What tips, practical tips, do you have to help and support me?
I'd say, I mean, it's great that you've joined the network. So, you know, I'd definitely do some listening there, contacting, actually asking them what do they need of allies? What does good allyship look like for them? Find others out there. Blog about it. You know, raise it in team meetings. You know, get in touch if you're in a foundation trust. Get in touch with your chair of your governors. Drop your chief executive a note, actually, and tell them about what it is you're doing. And, you know, so, I mean, I think there are a range of ways, really. Speak to the Freedom Speak Up Guardian. You know, in our organisation, we've got advocates out there who are acting out in services, supporting our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. With people getting their voices and views heard, but I think it sounds like you made a great start, you know, in joining the network and you know, starting those conversations there.
I'd say, sorry, John, go on.
I was just going to say that there are maybe one or two other opportunities, and one of them, a network alone is not going to achieve much, and it cannot be the responsibility of that network to change. So I think Samantha's covered it in congratulating this individual. But look at some of the other broader models out there about, you know, how many ambassadors work with your networks and what do they do across the organisation to promote the cause. And also start speaking to people like the director of HR. Of course, it's right to speak to all the other potential bodies in the organisation, to the unions, to the Speak Up Guardian, to some of the professional bodies. Go out there, talk to people, learn from other organisations, and then talk to your HR people and your directors about how we can really expand not the role of the network, but influence of this really important challenge across the organisation and start to make a real difference in everybody's thinking.
In addition, I'd say email your chief exec. Ask them, just email them. Say, look, I'm interested. I want to learn more. I want to do more. How can you use me? That's what I'd do. We did again, our staff network did another amazing webinar last week. And I got a number of emails after that about colleagues just saying, what about this? What about that? Have you thought of this? That's not good enough. All of you need to sort this. Da, da, da. And it's you know, it's brilliant. It's sort of, for me, it's incredibly energizing because you want to be able to reach into the organisation and understand what's going on and am I getting it right, am I getting it wrong? Just email them. And if they don't email you back, well, that might tell you something as well. So, and it can't always be just because they're a bit busy, you know, because we all are.
Thank you, Oliver. A question for John. John, a caller has asked, could you please share more detail on the work you're doing with Yvonne in London? And they've given an example, CEO learning sets.
Oh, well, yes, I mean, the CEO learning set. In fact, we kicked this off pre-COVID. It was at the beginning of the winter. And again, it's a commitment from Sir David Sloman. And I don't think I'm sharing any secrets if I say that David was very forthright. And when he was appointed to his post and asked what he wanted his legacy to be, he said he wanted to see this area really shift. And he supported that. And I think his appointment of me would suggest that he supports that. The fact that he's brought Yvonne Colquhoun into London, the biggest gun in the country, says he really means it. So the work that is going on at the moment with the King's Fund is working with chief executives and their learning sets, and it is all around the right behaviours, how you change organisations, what the right culture should look like, how you do a lot of the stuff that Oliver exhibits in his behaviour. So I wonder how many chief execs would take much notice of an email. I know Oliver would. How many others would? How many are open and receptive to all of that? So I think there's some really good work going on. And the work that I'm doing with Yvonne at the moment, again, is for David to ensure that we have a robust, clear, tangible strategy in place by September this year for London that will make a tangible and enduring difference to this whole agenda across London. In the short term, what are the early wins? In the medium term, what do we need to work to? And the long term, what does the legacy need to look like? This feels more real now than it ever has in the time that I've been engaged in this process. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, John. We have a question around mentoring. So I'm going to add mentoring and reverse mentoring. So an individual started doing some mentoring. They have 3 BAME staff members, and they want to know from the panel, can you give them any pointers in terms of how they can be an effective ally and an effective mentor?
I think I would again just start through having that conversation, you know, at the very outset with the mentee about what it is they're hoping to gain from the relationship. And I think, you know, some curiosity and appreciative inquiry, you know, what matters most to them, would they, you know, share their, you know, experiences with them, but most of all, I think encouraging them and building the trust that actually that conversation with you is going to be a really safe and sacred space, you know, that it is absolutely going to be confidential. But I think the kind of curiosity to really inquire why it is they're seeking the mentorship, and you know what they're hoping to gain from it is certainly where I would start.
I would just make an observation, if I may. Mentoring, reverse mentoring, one of the most powerful and actually emotionally quite distressing things that I ever did was reverse mentoring, and really getting inside the lived experience of my mentor. She was amazing, and I think doing that gives us some really good insights into how the traditional system of mentoring could work for BAME staff. But that reverse mentoring was such an education to me. It was shocking, it was moving, it was amazing. And I think everyone should engage in that if they're senior work leaders.
So I'd agree with everything Sam and John has said. I guess that the bit I'd say is, you know, only do it if you're really interested, you know, because, you know, when you're in that one-to-one conversation, people easily discern the bullshit meter. So whether you're really interested or not. So you've got to be honest and authentic. You've got to be genuinely interested about the dynamic of the two of you together. And you need to coach, nurture, challenge. Sometimes if it's part of a, you know, going for a job, you need to help reset people, go again, you know, because I think that's and be honest, you know, because I think if you're in that space, say if you're a more senior person and the person in front of you is a more junior person, you're in that space to make yourself feel a bit good, and that's, you know, you're absolutely not sitting in the right chair. So it's got to be an honest, open relationship. You've got to have a genuine commitment to do something to try and enable whatever that person's presenting in front of you. And say if you're not committed in that hour to listening to that person and trying to help them to find their solutions, and don't be sitting in the room.
you so much for that. I have a particular question, and I sense the frustration in this question, but I'm going to present it to the panel. And just on the top of that question, there has been some extensive work around the qualifications of white colleagues compared to our BAME colleagues, and there is a body of evidence that shows that BAME, because BAME people get a lot of knockbacks, that they have actually got double and triple the qualification. So one of the callers has said, I have done everything I can. I have studied more than my white colleagues, even my boss. They give all the opportunities to whites. I have been coached, mentored also. How many of our white allies realistically would have the resilience that blacks do? We get knocked back so often. What else can I do? So can any of the panels take that question, because this person has obviously tried several times, and that mimics the experience of a number of BAME staff.
So I think that's true. I've certainly met with a number of BAME colleagues who've shared that narrative with me, and I've sat with more than one who said to me, Oliver, you know, clearly I haven't got the qualifications I need to go for X. I think I'm going to go and do, I don't know, a master's. And I remember saying, for God's sake, don't be going off and doing another bloody course. You don't need another course. You've got enough qualifications. It's not about that. So long as you feel you've got the right commensurate qualifications to do the job, then more is not going to get you the job. So it's not about that. This is what I mean. These are only my views, so it does make it fact. I think, and that goes back to the previous conversation about mentoring, is how you try and get someone to a position where you can get them over the line in a job. And that's not easy, and you won't always get it right, and sometimes there'll be failure. But it is absolutely not about having multiple qualifications, because that's, you know, you will know there'll be, how many we've got, 300 plus people on this call tonight. There will be a significant percentage who'll be saying, you know, I don't need to go and get myself another master's, because that's not the bit that's doing it. So I think it's something else that's needed, and something else is about recognizing that sometimes you'll go and see a panel, and the panel won't may have a, you know, different view who should get the job. So there may be biases built in. So you just got to get the person to the very, very best they can on that day, and sometimes people do undersell themselves, and that's the role of coaching up people like me, where we get you to be your very best on the day. It's so bloody hard for that panel not to give you the job. Only my view.
Yes, I mean, I have mentored. I mentor people, and in fact, I you know, had a breakthrough a few weeks ago when I took a phone call from a mentee who had finally landed a very senior job. And this is somebody I started mentoring 3 years ago, who the very first, within 5 minutes of meeting, you know, absolutely qualifications, but also had suffered a series of knockbacks, unexplainable disappointment at going to jobs. And I listened to them, and we started some work together, and then I experienced through that journey that they then went on through applying for some more jobs, the heartache, the pain, the impact, the questioning, the knock-on confidence, and it's actually soul destroying. And it got to me, because actually this is somebody who's incredibly capable, and I think we are, it's something that I'm sort of actively exploring at the moment. And in fact, there's some evidence base around this. So the London Assembly has been doing this, actually moving more into active sponsorship. So I think particularly for people at certain points in their career, they need to be given stretch assignments. They need to be invited into meetings and spaces. They need shadowing opportunities. They need to build their portfolio of experience. But it is soul destroying, I think, the constant you know, making it through to, you know, the final two or the final three and not quite cutting it. And you know, one of the things I have learned more than anything through that is the importance, and I get quite angry when I think about this actually, the importance of constructive feedback, because when they haven't been successful, the appointee, the chair of the interview panel could not tell them why or give them anything constructive. You know, it was this constant message of, you were really great, but you were just picked at the post, you know, nothing even constructive. So, you know, certainly when I talk to colleagues and kind of share that experience, it's one of the things that, you know, and I do when I'm interviewing people now, is just make sure that you really give people constructive feedback that's going to support them and help them, but also not dent their confidence. Because I've been there when I've not been successful, whether it's applying to get on a course I've wanted to do or go for a job. But, you know, we have to support each other through this, and it's tough seeing those constant knockbacks.
I would very strongly support Oliver and Sam in what they've said. And this really is a shocking indictment of the system, really. You know, the reality is my BAME colleagues will be better qualified than me. They will have to work a lot harder to equal the outcomes that I get because of the privileged position that I'm in. And in many ways, you know, there's something terribly wrong with the current system. We offer lots of coaching, we offer lots of mentorship, and it still doesn't work. Why? Because of this institutional racism and the culture of the NHS that is allowed to continue. And as Sam just said quite rightly, how many times have I heard people say, oh, you were really great, you were just pipped at the post? That is so common. I think we need to get behind these individuals, give them the exposure that Sam has talked about, and work them through the organisation, exercising that human kindness and compassion, expose them to the different elements of the organisation so they get a feel about what these interview panels are expecting of them. And as I think Oliver quite rightly said, make it impossible for that panel not to give you the job.
I'm going to hit the pause button there from the questions from the Q&A box because I'm conscious of the time. But thank you for those fantastic questions. Thank you, Felicia, for moderating that session for us. I think we need to capture these questions and get answers to them and put something out, because it's been a really powerful Q&A session. In our last 10 minutes before I hand over to Wendy, I want to ask the panel, okay, what next? What now? What are you going to do? So we've done this, you've got the weekend to reflect and think and cogitate on it. What's next for you as leaders, for you as allies?
I'm happy to make a start. I think keep working at it, you know. Now is the time. I know that was a phrase that was used earlier, but it truly is the time. So I think to use, you know, the privilege and the platforms that I've got access to speak up and out about it, to seek out best practice, to collaborate with others that are doing this well, to acknowledge, you know, and be honest about the issues we're facing, and then, you know, through work with our board and right through our organisation, and most importantly our BAME network, who, you know, quite rightly are holding us to account and saying, you know, enough platitudes, we've absolutely got to see action. Really commit to some tangible, measurable actions. So, you know, as I said earlier, we're redoubling our efforts on that. But I think most importantly, use every platform that I can get access to convince others to join and be you know, be the change we absolutely need to see. Because, you know, the NHS is a public institution. It's paid for by the people. It's for the people. And we cannot tolerate an NHS, a publicly funded NHS that's for the people, you know, for our communities, that delivers poor outcomes for you know, a part of that community. It's no longer tolerable. And also, you know, the harm and the suffering that we're causing within the workplace, you know, we need to shape those cultures of psychological safety where people can speak up, to be their authentic selves at work, to bring their full selves to work, to celebrate that diversity. So, you know, I intend to keep learning, keep listening, and, you know, using every opportunity that I've got to, you know, fight for equality on this issue.
Thank you, Sam. Keep learning, keep listening, and keep fighting for equality on this issue. So, Sam, what about you, John?
I mean, Sam's kind of said it already, but so one of the things for me that's going to be really powerful is looking at the recommendations that were initially redacted in the PHE report, and look at the empowerment opportunities in there, moving into empowering communities, developing culturally sensitive risk assessments and so on. And those recommendations look as though they could potentially make a real difference to what happens into the future. The demands around different data sharing, data collection, empowering the systems to understand what's going on, look at the less prevalent disorders and disease processes in communities. All these things are going to be really quite empowering. And if we all support that and work on that, it will automatically create a stronger, more empowered system in the NHS. But as Sam said, there can be no letting up. You know, if we do not pick this up and demand the same of our white peers now, we will lose a huge opportunity. But I am optimistic. There's so much energy out there. And this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So, Oliver, John's optimistic. Are you optimistic? What are your plans?
So I am optimistic. I am optimistic, but I think you know, this is not going to be easy. This is, you know, if you were to look back in history, you know, I think I said earlier on, this feels like a tipping point. But I imagine if we had that hindsight bias mirror sitting here, we'd say there have been loads of tipping points over the past, you know, 100 years. So I am optimistic, but we've got to work at it, and we need forums like today to, you know, to really champion and hold people like me to account and say, are you doing enough, Oliver? You know, you need to do more. Because if we don't do that, if we don't have that collective sense of we're going to change this, the risk is it will just, you know, a couple of months in, things will just ebb back to where I can even see that in COVID now. You know, COVID, all of that whole community anxiety about this disease, and now people are standing within a couple of feet of each other outside shops to get their fish and chips. You know, so there's something about, we mustn't let the reset be back to how it was. We've really got to do something about that. So I think we have to be, I was thinking about, you know, as we were going along tonight and over the past few days, we've got our network have got a strategy or draft strategy needed to set out, and I'm wondering, is it bold enough? Is it really going to take the organisation where it needs to go? I think probably not. So we might need to look again at that. I think how we serve our communities as an organisation, we don't go far enough. I think the PHE report just calls that out. So we've got a lot to do, and it's going to take energy and commitment. And you know, we're going to have to remain a bit angry about it all, I think, so we don't get subsumed into, you know, just complacent.
Okay, thank you. So being bold, probably being a bit brave about it as well going forward. We've heard a lot tonight. We've discussed a lot. We've heard some fantastic questions and received some great answers. I want to just one more question from me before I hand over to Wendy, who I know has a few things to close us with. Given what you've heard tonight and given what you've been thinking about, you know, what's a quote that you're going to carry through to help keep this at the forefront of your mind? Is there a quote that you can share with us that you just think, this is the thing that's going to help me stay on track? So that if I see you, I'm going to quote that back to you to remind you, don't get off track. Sam, do you want to go first?
I mean, there's so many. I'm just trying to. There's so many. You know, I mean, for me, my whole mantra is always be the change you want to see. You know, so you know, the journey starts with self, really. But you know, be the change you want to see, and you know that's something that you know, keeps me going in some of the darkest hours, really. But I would say that. But you know, I love that Nelson Mandela quote. You know, one of the most difficult things is not to change society, but to change yourself. And you know, if I'm thinking about allies and I'm thinking about the challenge and the struggle that we are going to have, because Oliver, you know, as he said, it's not going to be easy. You know, we have to impress upon people that this isn't something they do to people or they do within an organisation. The change has to start with yourself.
Okay, thank you, Sam. John?
Well, I was going to quote you and say there are 2 viruses, but I won't, because that would not be reasonable. But I remember many years ago in an assertive outreach team in mental health, someone saying, if you're not prepared to wear the marigolds, don't bother turning up. In other words, there is dirty and difficult work to be done. And either you're here to support that or don't bother turning up. And I think we are at that moment now. If you're not really prepared to make a difference on this agenda, then you're not worthy of the post that you're in.
Okay. And finally, Oliver, over to you.
So, little book. It's called Be Immortal by Atul Gandhi. So it's an absolutely beautiful book, and I think, and it's about the substance of being human, and particularly what it feels like when you're older, and how society takes a predisposition to what it's like being old and lonely, and we medicalise everything. But there's this quote in it that's always stood out for me. So it's about being human. And it says, the battle of being mortal is the battle to maintain the integrity of one's life, to avoid being so diminished or dissipated that you become so disconnected from who you are, who you want to be. And I think my role as a white ally, as a chief executive, is to do all I can to get you to be who you want to be. So that's my quote.
Right. Change starts with self. Wear the marigolds. Be who you want to be. One of my favourite quotes, I've got those, but I will say nothing for us without us. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Wendy to close the webinar.
Wow. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Wendy, we can.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Cherron. Another great evening, another great session. We just like to say thank you, a big thank you to all our panelists. You have taken that bold step to come on today to show us how brave you are and to also role model things to all your colleagues. And also, in addition, you've been very honest, you're very open, and you're very genuine. You came across very genuine. For that, we say thank you to you. And we hope that all our participants, our attendees, will be taking 1 or 2 things away from this session. This is our 10th. Actually, I was counting. I didn't realize we've actually had so many, sessions. It's been a weekly event in and out. And through the week or month, there have been a lot of things that have come out. So for you to take away today, we actually divided it into 3 sessions. So medium, immediate, medium, and long time for changes. Because we're not just going to go away and make it another talk show. Because of time, I will just mention one. You've already mentioned a couple of them, actually, in terms of calling things out as it is. And we're very glad that we have people like you. And I must say, I'm very proud of my CEO where I am. I'm happy to mention her name, Alwyn Williams. She's really taking it as you are taking it. So I'm one of the luckiest ones that have a trust that is really addressing it and not just sweeping it under the carpet. So you're calling it as it is and you're addressing it instantly. So one of the things that comes strongly is about risk assessment. A lot of BAME staff are not really comfortable and happy for the managers to do their risk assessment. So could it be you guys going back to your individual trust and engage with your occupational health department and see if that is something that could be explored? So that's number 1 for under immediate actions. Another immediate action is to apply to NHS charities and engage with them, because when we had one of the seminars that we had with Professor Fenton, we had the CEO of the NHS charities saying that there is money for BAME networks. So it would be nice that you go out there and then link and liaise with them to get this funding to support the BAME networks. One of the medium changes that we would love to see is making sure that there is a sustainable career plan for BAME staff. Yes, we've had a lot of shadowing, mentoring, and all that, and training, as you've all said today. A lot of us have many trainings, many degrees, PhDs, but that opportunity is not there. So it's about providing practical opportunities for BAME staff. And a medium one will also be the need to liaise with your other colleagues, both and your counterparts across NHS, local authorities, public health, to implement the PHE, the Public Health England recommendations in the PHE report. I think it's very important that we all work together to ensure that recommendations are being implemented fairly, quickly, and instantly. So on that note, again, I say thank you. And before we go, last week we had a fantastic session, and we had Jennifer on, who is the specialist in cultural intelligence. So I'm going to call her to just announce the winner of the 2 people for our 2 places. She actually offered 2 places on our course that is coming up next month. And it's very important that actually as CEOs, you engage with us in terms of cultural intelligence. And I know that has been spoken about across the board today. So we need to take things into action. Jennifer.
Hi. Hi there, good evening, and good evening to everyone. Another really great webinar. It's been great to be here. I know you've nearly finished, so I won't spend time talking at all, but I've got Vanessa Anthony, who's, I believe she's a student nurse, and Sally Ninza are the 2 people who won. I want to say thank you to everyone who wrote in. I had so many people and so many emails that I'm going to have to think about what I put on just to meet, even in the short term, some of the needs of the people that wrote in. But there is a course on the 23rd of July. It's a new course. It's Cultural Intelligence for BAME, people trying to get into leadership. It's really providing a space to think about how cultural intelligence can help people get over some of those barriers to progression, both internally and externally. And I'm really excited about this course because this is one that's really close to my heart. So it's on the 23rd of July. The link is on Eventbrite, and I'm really looking forward to running it. So congratulations to Vanessa and to Sally, and thank you for letting me come on again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Cherron, over to you.
Well, I think we're done. Well done, everyone. Thank you so much for our fantastic guests, Oliver, John, and Sam. You've been brilliant. Thank you for being so open and candid. Thank you to all of those who worked behind the scenes with Wendy, Felicia, and Edith, and Dr. Banjoko and so on. Thank you very much. And finally, thank you to you who spent 2 hours of your time on a Friday evening to join us for this fantastic discussion and submit those wonderful questions. Together, we will make progress. We will make a difference. Stay safe where you are. Keep smiling, keep progressing, and we will win. Take care. Good night.
See you next week.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Sam. Thank you so much. Bye, John. Nice to see you again.
Bye-bye. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Likewise. Wendy, we'll touch base soon.
Well done, you two. You're amazing. Hi, Cherron.
Hi, Jennifer. Nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Nice to see you too. You guys are amazing. Such an amazing webinar. I caught the half of it, but it's just
we had a tough act to follow from last week, so I had to up my game. So, but no.
Your game's always amazing, Cherron. You know that.
Oh, thank you.
But well done, guys. Really, really good. And and I'll be writing out to the 2, and I'm going to try and write to everybody else who wrote in anyway, and just sort of encourage them as well.
Excellent.
Yeah?
Excellent. That's
great.
So generous of you.
See you guys soon. Take care. God bless. Have a great weekend.
Okay. Well done,
Bye.
Wendy. Bye.